Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of What's Up Wednesday. My name is Carly Burridge, and I'm the owner and founder of Gaining Health, where we help healthcare providers and organizations who want to start or optimize an obesity practice. And every week I do What's Up Wednesday, which is where I share either a recent research article or a book on the topic of obesity medicine and talk to you about how you can use this information in your clinical practice. So the book that we are discussing today is a book that came out last year by BJ Fogg called Tiny Habits, The Small Changes That Change Everything. And BJ Fogg is a PhD, and he's a world-renowned behavioral specialist, and he's the founder of the Stanford Behavior Design Lab. And I love this book. I love the way he talks about behavior change, and even just the introduction is just so great. So I just want to read a brief excerpt of the introduction to you, because I think especially for those of us who work in obesity medicine, this just really hits home. He says, over the last 20 years, I found that most everyone wants to make some kind of change. Eat healthier, lose weight, exercise more, reduce stress, get better sleep. I mean, right there, there's just the foundation of obesity medicine. They're right there, right? But the alarming levels of obesity, sleeplessness, and stress reported by the media and seen in my research lab tells me that there's a painful gap between what people want and what they actually do. The disconnect between want and do has been blamed on a lot of things, but people blame it on themselves for the most part. They internalize the cultural message of, it's your fault. You should exercise more, but you aren't doing it. Shame on you. I am here to say it isn't your fault. So I think that that introduction right there just speaks so much to the bias and the stigma that we see in obesity. And we have tools now that help us with some of the neurobiological components of these behaviors, like eating behaviors and things like that. We know that there's a lot more to it than simply making better choices. We know that there's a dysfunction of that energy regulatory system, which drives eating behaviors and hunger and cravings. But, even with the tools that we now have to help overcome that, such as medications and surgery to help with that component, making behavior change is still really difficult. And a lot of the behaviors that we talk about in obesity medicine, aren't helped by medications or surgery or other tools. So if we're trying to work on exercise behaviors or sleep behaviors or stress management techniques, again, we don't necessarily have any medications or tools to help with that, right? So regardless, behaviors are always difficult to change. And in obesity medicine, we hear a lot about motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy, and those are all important components. But what I love about this book is that BJ really takes a lot of those concepts and he combines them into a behavioral model that I just think makes a lot of sense. So the Fogg Behavior Model states that behavior happens when motivation, ability, and prompt converge at the same moment. So he has this B equals MAP. So that's behavior equals motivation, ability, and prompt. And so when all of those happen at the same time, the behavior occurs. If one of those is missing or lacking, the behavior does not occur. And I think this is just such a simple model, but it makes so much sense. And a lot of times in motivational interviewing and obesity medicine, we focus so much on the motivational piece, which is clearly necessary and very important, but it's also very fickle and subject to change. And so BJ argues that really we need to, first and foremost, have a very solid, reliable prompt, because without the prompt, the behavior doesn't occur. Then, as far as the ability, we want to make sure that the behavior is easy to do. So the easier it is to do, the more likely it is that we will do it, and the less motivation we really need for it. So that's another thing. And that's why it's called Tiny Habits. It's about really breaking it down into something and making the behavior very easy so that people will be successful. And then lastly, we look at motivation. So again, motivational interviewing really comes in here. But again, that's kind of the last thing that we look at rather than the first or only thing that we look at. And I also love that he ties in the dopaminergic system because he argues that it's the release of dopamine after successfully completing a behavior. Again, that's why it's so important that it's easy to do and that we're successful with it. And then that we celebrate that because when we celebrate it, we get this release of dopamine, and that's the learning neurotransmitter, right? So he argues that rather than simple repetition of a behavior causing a habit, he argues that it's that dopamine release that really helps create these habits. And I think he's very right when he says that people change best when they feel good. And I really use that in my clinical practice. No matter what's going on, I find something positive. I'm always making sure that the patient knows I'm happy to see them. The fact that they showed up, that's a positive. It doesn't matter what else went wrong that month. Focus on what went right. Because again, that's that learned behavior, that dopamine release that will get them to want to come back and see you and continue those positive behaviors. Nobody changes well when they feel guilt and shame and negativity. Lastly, he has two maxims that I really love that I think are so helpful when we're thinking about working with our patients. And one is help people do what they already want to do. So ask your patients which behaviors they want to work on and then help them make those behaviors possible and help them create a structure and a plan for those behaviors. And number two is help people feel successful. So again, celebrate with your patients, create, outcomes and goals that are doable, that are achievable, and then celebrate with them. And even if they didn't reach those goals, help them feel successful in another way. Like I said, just the fact that they showed up that day is a success. So there's just so much great information in this book, and it's all evidence-based and based on years of research. And I highly recommend this book to anybody who's either trying to make some behavioral changes of their own or who is working with patients and trying to help them with behavior modification. So again, that's Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. All right, so that's it for this week for What's Up Wednesday. We'll be back next week with another episode. If you are a provider or an organization looking to either start or optimize an obesity medicine practice, make sure you check out gaininghealth.com to look at our resources and subscribe for our weekly newsletter. And I will see you all back next week. Take care.